Have you, as a parent, ever felt overwhelmed by all the parenting advice out there? Books, blogs, podcasts, people telling you what you should and shouldn't do, advice from random strangers and well-meaning aunties that should know their place better. One tells you to be stricter, another tells you to be gentler, and before you know it, you're left wondering, where do I even start? If that sounds like you, you're not alone. Parenting today can feel like drinking from a fire hose of opinions. But the reality is that it doesn't need to be as complex as that. What we need is simply what will work for our families and taking one step at a time through that process. In today's video, I'm going to share the core parenting habits that my family practices on a day-to-day basis, followed by three simple points for you to get started. So let's dive right in. Now, in my last videos, I shared a parenting framework that I designed, and there were three components: self, marriage, and parenting. Today's video will focus primarily on the parenting part of it. But before I go there, let me cover briefly about the marriage. Right, so in terms of marriage habits that me and my wife practice, we set aside time for lunches, long-form lunches, as well as intimacy. And as far as we can, we do not detract from that time that we set apart. Alright, so long-form lunches is really when we can just chill, relax, have those conversations that will surface issues, or simply enjoy the time that we have together. Other than that, we don't really have any strong common interests. We do watch the occasional Netflix film. I enjoy fantasy. She watches almost everything. But that's about it. Right? And if you do have a common interest, I strongly encourage you make good use of it together as husband and wife. Now, moving on to the parenting practices that we employ at home, I think the most important and fundamental one is probably couch time. Right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, let me give you a quick recap. Couch time is basically when husband and wife sit together on the couch at the end of the day and they focus on each other and just catch up without interference from any of the children. So they ask, how was your day? How do you feel? Show affection to each other, that sort of thing. And the children are trained not to interrupt. The logic of this is that when the children see that Papa and Mama do love each other, their world feels suddenly a lot safer, and it's much easier for them to then obey. Right? From a Christian perspective, the logic is that God loved us and He pours out His love into us, and therefore it is important for us to show and demonstrate that love that we now have in our marriage to our children, which is then poured out into their lives. Okay? And because typically once you get married, things become very transactional, it's important to have and protect this time daily, right? Whether you do it for 5 or 30 minutes. Right? We typically do it for 4 to 5 times a week at least, but my recommendation is to do it daily. Now, the other practices that we have a devotional material that we do each night before we sleep. That only takes about 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll share the link to that devotion material in the description below. We also have what we call family sleep. So basically, our family doesn't sleep in the same room. The children sleep in one room and we sleep in another room. And that has been our practice since day one. And it is a best practice in terms of parenting. For reasons I will not go into here. But essentially, Friday and Saturday nights are when we all sleep together as a family. And the children love it because it's a special night for them. We also have prayer points throughout the day. So we have the regular one where we thank God for the meal, but we have a few set prayers that are a little bit more specific, right? So the one that I like the most, and it's the most meaningful to me, is the one in the morning right before we go out, right? So we will take the lift down, we'll meet, and then we'll pause, right? And we will say, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, thank you for this day. Be with us as we work, study, and play. Amen. And may all that we do bring glory and honor to your name. Amen. Right? So it's meaningful to me because typically when we're going out, we're trying to rush and it's very flustered and the children are not listening. But the moment we get down on the first floor, we sort of have to just pause there and say this prayer. So it's a very helpful reminder that whatever we're doing, we want to do it well and for God. Okay, there are other sort of specific prayers that we have. We have one right before dinner time where we light a physical candle and the children love it because they get to blow out the candle after. We thank God for the food, and we also pray for those who need food, that God will provide for them wherever they may be. Right, so that's sort of like a meal-specific kind of prayer. And then we have one final one before we sleep. So typically, this will involve looking back on our day, looking at what are we grateful or sorry for. We will review or we will pray the same content as the devotional that we just did earlier. So maybe today is about gratitude, for example, then we will pray something related to gratitude. And then we will look forward to one event tomorrow, whether we need help for it or we're looking forward to it and we're excited about it and we want to tell God about it. Anything along those lines. Right, so that is all for our sort of prayer routines. Now I will go on to training and discipline. Right, so maybe it's helpful if I just share what I'm training my children at this point in time. Right, so my girl Ori, she's 3.5, and the current training is for her to finish her food by herself within half an hour. Right, so if you leave her on her own, she will take 2 hours and she'll probably stare at you and look around with no food in her mouth. Right, and so that's the expectation. She is expected not to complain or whine about her food. She can tell us that she doesn't like the food, but she still has to finish the food. Right, and if she whines, that's basically not being grateful, and we will take the food away from her. Right, so I've tried positive reinforcement, meaning giving a reward if she finishes within 30 minutes. That hasn't really worked. We are now trying princess stickers because she loves princesses. But we are, for now, defaulting to caning if she doesn't meet the target. Right, so that's for Ori. Now for Brom, I've recently managed to successfully train him to shower by himself within 5 minutes. He's about 5, almost 5.5 now. And to shower without, number one, turning on the tap for 10 minutes and doing nothing. And number two, pouring out the entire soap bottle just to take a shower. Right, so I've had to literally sit there and watch him do the steps, rinse, soap, shower, and guide him specifically, set a timer for 5 minutes, and when he finishes on time, he feels very, very satisfied. Right, but that's sort of now done. Right, now I want to go on to a bit of like our structure around discipline and punishment. So timeout and caning, right, that's sort of like the general framework we use. And before I start, let me just say that I believe in caning because the rod is mentioned in the Bible. And I also believe in pain as a very meaningful consequence to learning, right? So I don't cane primarily because I'm angry and I want to take it out on my children. I cane because I believe that it is good for my child's formation, right? And there are a lot of considerations before we can even come to caning. But maybe let me just run through an example so that it's a bit more clearer. So my boy, yesterday I brought him to a play/art area. And I told him the first time not to take out his shoes, right? And he took out his shoes. I reminded him, and then later on, he took out his shoes again, right? So because the expectation has been set and the instruction has been given, therefore he's going to be held responsible for that. And the punishment is that I brought him to a corner and gave him a 3-minute timeout. Now in all of this, I wouldn't typically cane him, but because he chooses to escalate on me, so he basically started to jump, get jittery, complain, and whine about everything, his punishment, and he continued to do this for 5 to 10 minutes. And so that moves from just simply doing the wrong thing or making a mistake to willful, persistent disobedience. Right? So to me, that is the primary basis for caning. And therefore, I told him if he continues to do this, he will be caned when he goes home. And that's what he did, and that's what he received when he went home. Right? So it's important also to ensure that the instruction that we give our children actually sets them up for success. We may think that this is very simple, but typically we have expectations, but we don't give our children the corresponding instruction nor the ability to obey the instruction. Right? So for example, when I give my children instruction, I will ask them to pause, to look at me, I will give the instruction, and I will tell them to say, "Yes, Papa," to acknowledge the instruction. And then of course I'll make sure that they can actually do the instruction. Right, so when I do this, typically they obey immediately and there's no issue. Right, but if I call them when I'm doing something else, then the chances of obedience is a lot lower. I also believe in first-time obedience. So by this, I mean that you obey immediately and completely, right? Not partial obedience, not delayed obedience. And the basis for this is a Christian basis, is because God also expects us to obey immediately and fully. Now, what this doesn't mean is that I don't say things like, I'm going to count to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and only at 9 and 10, then I start to escalate and shout, and then they suddenly obey, right? No. And I also don't repeat myself. I don't repeat 1, 2, 3 times before they obey. I say it one time, I say it well, and they obey. And if they don't obey, and I have ensured that I've done everything in my power to help them to obey, then I mete out the consequence. So it's very, very law system-like. Right? And that has worked very well for them and for our family. Right? So this is really in contrast to how most parents typically approach obedience. Right? And the whole idea is that it is important for your words to matter. So when you count 1 to 10 or you repeat yourself 2, 3 times, your words don't actually matter. Right? Now I don't expect them to obey immediately now at this age all the time, but I'm working towards it. And I have it as an end goal, right? So if you have your end goal as first time obedience, you might, for this time when they are maybe 3 or 4 or 5, you might have third or fourth time obedience, right? But if your goal is third time obedience and you keep on repeating yourself 3 times, well, chances are your child is going to have like 6, 7 or 8 time obedience. You have to repeat yourself that amount of times, right? So the point is that it is first time obedience is actually not demanding or unreasonable. It is actually very, very good expectation to have for your children and to work towards it in an age-appropriate manner, right? Which I don't see most of the parents around me doing. Right? So that's for timeout and caning. Now I want to go on to sleep training, which, although my kids are 3 and 5, but it's a huge hot topic and highly controversial, with a lot of moms screaming and shedding tears. So I definitely want to cover it. Now my children were trained between, I think, 14 to 16 weeks to sleep through the night 8 hours, and then later on extend to 12 hours, right? Now most parents, especially mothers, when they approach this topic, they typically can't bear to hear their children crying for such a long period of time, and they feel that it's very cruel, and therefore they don't sleep train. Let me suggest to you that this is a highly myopic perspective when it comes to sleep training, and this is why. So sleep training, actually to have prolonged restorative sleep, is actually very essential, not just for adults, but for children as early as is age appropriate to sleep train, right? So this sleep is very important for them and their developmental growth, right? It's got something to do with like the neural networks and the synaptic connections or cognitive growth that your brain is able to do only when you have prolonged sleep. Right, so for me, this is a very compelling reason why you should sleep train, right? People sleep train, they think that the main reason is so that the parents can have a good night's sleep, and that is alone a good enough reason to sleep train. But it's more than that, it's also for the child's developmental growth. And therefore, if you don't sleep train your child from an early age, you might be potentially actually delaying the benefit that your child gets from having prolonged sleep, because you're going to wake up every 2-3 hours. And not gain that benefit, right? So the question is not, can I bear all this pain and cruelty to my child's whining and tears just for my own selfish peace and sleep of mind, right? The question is it worth it to go through 3 days to 2 weeks of 1 hour of crying per night in order to secure this long-term developmental benefit, right? Or is it not? Right? Now, of course, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's a value judgment, right? In my view, the decision becomes quite clear. I certainly would sleep train for that benefit. But for most mothers and parents, they haven't even arrived at this consideration. They are primarily reacting because they can't stand their children crying, and they feel that it's very, very cruel, right? So to this group, if you are in this group, I would ask you, please research and be informed, right, about the actual benefits, and make that judgment choice, whichever it is, right? And so to me, that is the primary basis by which I sleep train, right? For the papa and mama's benefit, and for the child's benefit as early as possible. Now, let me go on to 2 other practices that I've wanted to implement, but I haven't yet. So the first is called centering prayer. Right? The adult version of this is an ancient practice. The adult version of it is 20 minutes minimum recommended, whereby you sit and you focus primarily on your breathing. And if your thoughts stray, once you're conscious of it, you bring it back to your breathing. So it's a very simple practice, and I have adopted it, appropriated it for my boy, who is 5, to just 3 minutes. And to me, this is very, very helpful because, number one, he can't sit still because of his personality, unlike my daughter. And number two, culturally, he is very stimulated throughout the day. And so the ability to just be still and just push aside your thoughts and focus on your breathing, to me, is a very meaningful activity. Right? I actually haven't been very rigorous in implementing it. And in fact, he has reminded me that he should do it each morning more than the other way around. But that's something that I definitely hope to incorporate as a habit in the long term. The second practice is this thing called Imaginative prayer. It's from a book by the same title. I'll leave it in the description below as well. But essentially, you are given a scenario as a parent and you read through this scenario to help your child imagine a certain scene whereby maybe a friend helps them or God cares for them in a very specific and precise way rather than in generic terms. So it's, as the title suggests, very imaginative. And the reason why I value this practice very highly is because Protestant churches in general do very well. They'll teach your children Bible study, key verses. It's a very cognitive-based approach, right? And that is also influenced heavily by our Singaporean education system, right? However, Protestant churches in general do very little in the realm of imagination and nurturing intimacy in the same way that a parent-child relationship operates, right? So a parent-child relationship doesn't operate on set concepts, but on the intimacy that is shared throughout the day. And therefore, this book sort of closes the gap and complements what my children will get through church on a day-by-day, on a week-by-week basis. Right, so that's the second practice. Now, that sort of concludes most of the core practices that we have on a day-to-day parenting perspective. And I want to go on to 3 simple ways you can start on your journey. The first one, I think, of all the things that I've mentioned, is to do your couch time. Right? So, it's difficult, but to me, it's the single most important event, other than talking about your own character formation, which is a different topic and will require a lot more mindset and knowledge before you might want to get started. But couch time is very simple, and you will be able to reap the benefits in maybe a month's time, and you might also notice your marriage improving because you actually are spending time focused on the other person rather than your kids all the time. Right? So that's the first pointer. The second is to decide on a set of house rules with your spouse. Decide the consequences and stick and commit to those consequences, similar to the manner in which I have described. Right? Now this, I know, is a very tricky topic because for most parents, the husband and the wife disagree, and typically what is decided is the lowest common denominator or the whims and fancies of one spouse. Right? And that is not a good thing for your family unit as well as for your children. Right? And this brings me to my third pointer. If you are having difficulty with alignment, what I suggest we have found helpful, even though me and my wife are quite aligned, but we have found it really helpful to be even more aligned, is to go for a set of parenting courses. Now, the one that we have gone for is by this organization called Growing Families International. I highly recommend it, not only because the trainer, she's a lady, I think in her 50s, she's one of the wisest persons I've met and one of the fantastic parenting trainer and coach. But actually, that's not the main reason why you should go for this class. Okay, the content of this class ranges from infant skills management practices, routines. In toddler, it might be like boundary drawing, and then later on, it's more like mindset. It goes all the way until like sex education for teenagers, digital management of devices, so on and so forth. That's the content. But I wouldn't even say that the content is the biggest draw. To me, the biggest draw is 2 things. The first is the normalization, the creation of new norms for yourself to refer to. Right? So people always say that we are the sum of the 5 closest friends that we hang out with, and that is very, very true in parenting. Right? even if I disagree with the current parenting norms in Singapore today, the reality is that I'm faced with them every time I talk to other parents, and therefore it's very difficult for me to implement and stick to what I believe. Now, when you go for this course, you will actually find that other parents are struggling with exactly the same things, and that the trainer can actually deal with it. Then the parent go back and practice and whatever adaptations they need, and they come back and actually resolve the issue in a similar vein or with a similar philosophy that I've described. Meaning, it actually works. And that is very, very important in today's parenting climate, because it allows us to develop our frame of reference and actually believe that this kind of philosophy is plausible and that it actually works. Right, so that's, to me, one of the key benefits. And the other one is that if you and your spouse disagree, it's really between your word or mine, right? And that's not going to be very helpful. But when you go for this course, you are actually both coming as students wanting to learn from a trainer. Right? So this is also contingent on the fact that you want to learn and you're open to learn, right? If you're going for this course to stick on your own ground or defend your own turf, it's probably not going to be helpful, and you're better off just not going and doing whatever you're currently doing, right? But when you both attend a course under a trainer, you actually have a chance to decide which areas you want to take and not take, and it helps the alignment because it's a third-party expert that's teaching you, not your spouse trying to argue with you, right? So to me, these are the key benefits for attending this course, and I'll leave a link in the description box below to the courses that they have planned upcoming. Even if you're not in Singapore, you can attend these courses because most of them are online, or all of them, I think, nowadays, right? So that's all I have for today's video. I hope it's been helpful conclusion to the 4-part series of this parenting mindset series that I've shared. And if you do like this content, please give a like and do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.